All right, so we're going to get started, and I'll be turning it over to you in a second, Miles. I want to welcome all of you to our webinar tonight, and this is Miles. I've known Miles for a few years now, and he makes my head spin every time I listen to his talks or I read one of his articles. He has so much current information, but he really makes me think. And I'm sure everyone's going to enjoy this. Just want to let everyone know on your screen there is a Q&A panel, and feel free to type in questions and we'll answer them. I promise before we're done for the night, all the questions will be answered. After the webinar, all the attendees are being entered into a drawing, and courtesy of Miles and CV Science, or plus CBD, we have a gift for the lucky winner of products to help them. And I am recording this. It's streaming on Facebook Live right now, but it is being recorded, and it'll be on our website, on the blog site, for anyone that missed it or that wants to watch it again, because I'm sure there's so much information coming at us, we're not going to be able to absorb it all. And also that the Customer Appreciation Week is running right through the weekend through Sunday night. Everything in the store, the front store, is 20% off, and that includes everything that Miles is going to be talking about tonight. Feel free, you can order online, you can order by calling or stopping in the store, and everything will be 20% off. And with that, I'm going to mute myself, and I'm turning it over to you, Miles. You can share, I have it set up, you can share your screen, and you're all set to go.
Okay, and if it doesn't look right, start screaming at me and we'll figure it out.
I'll let you know.
Thank you, Dr. Gary. Hi, everybody. You may recognize me, although last time I gave a lecture at Johnson's Compounding and Wellness, I did not have a beard. That is a product of quarantine. And I really wish I could be speaking to you in person, but we are living in truly unprecedented times. And CV Sciences, makers of Plus CBD, is responding to the global chaos that is engulfing all of our lives. And so specifically today, we are going to be talking about immune function. And I want you all to be very aware of the fact that none of the products that I'm going to be talking to you about today are intended for a cure for any disease, a treatment for any disease whatsoever. What we're talking about is in the context of understanding that nutrition and beneficial supplementation can strengthen the immune system, can improve the tone and activity and structure and function of the immune system, okay? These are for educational purposes only, what we're going to be learning about in the next hour or so. But I have a lot of science that I wish to share with you. And if you've listened to me speak before, you'll know about how deep I like to go when it comes to CBD and our endocannabinoid system. We're just going to focus on the immune system a little bit more. So let me start by sharing my screen. We're going to jump into this. And can you all see my screen? My laser pointer. Oh, wait, hold on. Hey, here we go. You all can see this? Let me know if not. I want to start by, thank you, Dr. Gary. I want to start by acknowledging all the people on this screen. This title image is not based on stock photos. These are all real people that work in CV Sciences. That CV Sciences has been one of the early adopters of CBD and really brought it to our health food stores and our compounding pharmacies. And I'm just so grateful to work for a company that is interested in investing in research, because that published research, such as on the safety of CBD and on the efficacy of CBD, really opens the door for this industry to mature. And I want to thank partners like Johnson's Compounding and Wellness and everybody that works there for bringing in Plus CBD. They brought it in right after the passage of the December 2018 Farm Bill, which legalized CBD essentially from the perspective of the Drug Enforcement Administration. So they've been vanguards of access in terms of this ingredient, and we're just so grateful to have that type of partnership. But as I alluded to, things are different. And I'm going to be talking, I'm not going to be sugarcoating this. We have to be talking about COVID-19 and the current crisis that has engulfed the world right now. And I want to quote an article from the New England Journal of Medicine over here. We must realize that in our crowded world of almost 8 billion people, a combination of altered human behaviors, environmental challenges, and inadequate global public health mechanisms now easily turn obscure animal viruses into existential human threats. There is not one reason why the United States is suffering, why people of the world are dealing with this virus in a certain way or not. It is an intersectional crisis. It involves a number of different things spanning from sociology, economics, race, nutrition, science, so on and so forth. But the fact is that, and this is as of yesterday, that we're looking at, 23 million confirmed cases, almost 1 million deaths worldwide as a result of the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, that causes the disease COVID-19. I also want to be clear about the fact that this is not the first virus to really rock the world in this way, and that every winter in the northern hemisphere, every flu season does also cause a significant amount of morbidities, mortalities. So I want to kind of, highlight this little 4-panel box or square over here. Certain number of million people are going to catch the flu. A less amount of people are going to require a medical visit. A smaller amount, in the hundreds of thousands, are going to require hospitalizations. And then, tens of thousands are unfortunately going to succumb to death as a result of the flu virus. Where we think that we can help is by keeping us in box 1, in square 1 over here, or out of the paradigm altogether. And what I mean by that is that the evidence suggests, the scientific evidence suggests, that if you eat well, you eat lots of leafy greens, and your BMI is not too high, your weight is appropriate, you exercise modestly, and you take the right supplements, or you catch the rays of sunshine that give you vitamin D, that you're going to have a stronger immune system. And there's a lot of factors that lead to people having weakened immune systems that might ultimately cause them to have a stronger reaction or inappropriate immune response to influenza viruses. So this is where we feel that understanding stress response as well, on top of other lifestyle, diet, and supplement sort of regimes that you can prescribe to, also are really important in kind of keeping us either out of this whole box or just in square 1 over here. So I want us to understand a paradigm. We're talking a lot about the immune system, but there's another system that a lot of us are struggling with right now that kind of works in opposite to your immune system. So the immune system, if you think about it, protects you against threats that can invade the inside of your body. Internal threats, microscopic threats, bacteria, fungi, viruses, parasites, so on and so forth. Now, we have a hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA axis. And if you've ever felt your blood rush on a roller coaster before, then you know what it's like to have a fight or flight response, okay? And that's part of our stress system. And we have evolved a stress response to protect us against external threats. So again, if the immune system is for internal threats like SARS-CoV-2, novel coronavirus, then we have evolved the stress response system to help us run away in fight or flight from tigers, for example. The problem is that it's very uncommon for many of us in the current century to be encountering, tigers that are going to kill us when we're hunting or gathering, berries, or whatever, right? Like that's the context under which mammals evolved a fight or flight system, 10,000 years ago, is to run away, or millions of years ago, is to run away from predators. Today, in the 21st century, where we're relatively safe, our fight or flight response reacts to paper tigers. Whether that's what's on television, the news, whether, you read something that came in the mail and that causes you upset. Stress shuts down the immune system so that you can run away for your life. And it doesn't matter if that's a real tiger or if that's a paper tiger. Stress shuts down the immune system to conserve energy so that you can run away or fight the good fight. Now, if stress and the adrenal fight or flight response is overactive all the time, that can lead to inflammation. And inflammation, although necessary, in the long term is a form of your immune system that has effectively become dysregulated. Inflammation is a crucial component of your immune system, but if left unchecked, it's responsible for a number of chronic diseases of aging that Western medicine does not have a good answer for. So I want to talk a little bit more about the HPA axis. Basically, in the brain, there's a couple of glands like the hypothalamus and the pituitary. And in the brain, your eyeballs are going to see something or hear, your ears are going to hear something, and all that information gets sent to the amygdala, which is kind of like the fear or arousal center of your brain. And then that sends chemical messengers called neurotransmitters to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus sends messengers to the pituitary. Pituitary sends messengers to the adrenals. And in the long term, the adrenals are going to start chugging out a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol, basically, it's involved with getting you up and going. Now, cortisol is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. We need cortisol to wake up in the morning. Cortisol rises in the morning. Melatonin helps to shut down cortisol and get you to sleep. Cortisol rises, melatonin shuts down at night. So the other thing that cortisol does is kind of block immune function. Cortisol tells your immune cells, hey, stop doing what you're doing because we need to focus all of our cellular energy on this task, which in this instance might be a fight or flight response or waking up in the morning. Now, if any of you have ever used this before, hydrocortisone cream, then you will know about the fact that cortisol as a stress hormone blocks immune function. It's so good at blocking immune function and therefore inflammation that they put it in a tube and you can rub it on your skin in order to block immunity that might have to do with a rash or psoriasis. Psoriasis is a form of autoimmunity. Now, it always doesn't work that well, and I'm going to talk about that too, because our immune cells can become resistant to cortisol over time. And this is the point that I want to make here. So if cortisol shuts down our immune system, stress releases cortisol, cortisol shuts down our immune system so that you can run away for your life. We did not evolve being under stressful fear conditions 24 hours a day. We evolved the stress response so that, boom, you have it, and then you experience it, and then you can run away, and then it goes away. But I don't know if you remember, even just a couple of months ago, I'm talking about like March, April, and you tune on the television and every single news network, coronavirus deaths, this number, coronavirus cases, this number, in bright letters. Man, I was getting freaked out by that. I was getting a fight or flight response to that. Now, even though sitting on the couch in my living room, I was in no physical danger of dying in that moment, my body was sensing fear response, releasing cortisol, and you know what that was doing? That was actually diminishing my immune response. That was preventing me from staying healthy. When the opposite of what I should have been doing is meditating and exercise, deep breathing, to try to control my cortisol response. Because if I can't, then that could actually predispose me for catching the novel coronavirus or other types of infectious diseases by having a weakened or attenuated immune system. This is a normal stress response over here. The brain, in response to physical stress, mental stress, nutritive stress, oxidative stress, etc., signals via the HPA axis to the adrenals, and then cortisol is released, and that blocks immune function. Fine. Every once in a while, even healthy. Every once in a while. Transient stress, good. But if it's chronic everyday stress, due to physical stress, mental, emotional stress, whatever, then that causes sort of a low-grade release of cortisol. Cortisol is released, and then your immune cells, they stop listening to that message. They're like, are you crying wolf right now? I don't know if I should actually shut down or not. And then that inflammation that your immune cells, because they're not listening to the cortisol signal anymore, they are now starting to do whatever they want. And that means no restraint over their inflammatory processes. And that can trigger or feed into more stress or imbalanced cortisol response. And ultimately, in the end, the adrenals start to bottom out. They can't even muster cortisol response. And this is where we see people that are dealing with, metabolic challenges. They're gaining weight. They're feeling extreme fatigue. They can't get up in the morning, but they stay awake at night with anxiety. The whole cortisol cycle is flipped, and they're dealing with a lot of inflammation because the immune cells have become resistant to listening to the cortisol signal. And we're actually seeing this. Like, this is not just theory. And I want to show you this article over here. Associations of saliva levels of cortisol with inflammatory markers in humans that are dealing with atherosclerosis. And you actually see, so I like the way that this article is framed. Socioeconomic and psychosocial factors have been found to be associated with systemic inflammation. If you're poor, if you're a minority, if you're in a higher stress condition or state of being, if you're underemployed, that might link you to higher levels of inflammation via this disruption in the HPA axis. There's an inflammatory molecule that our immune cells produce, and it's a necessary molecule, but too much of it can be toxic, and it's called IL-6. So there's higher levels of IL-6 and less cortisol when you're supposed to have cortisol in awakening, and higher cortisol overall throughout the day. So there's imbalanced cortisol in people with higher levels of this IL-6 immune mediator. And especially, this is where I want to link it back to the current discussion. If you've ever heard the term cytokine storm before, or if you're thinking about, why is it that some people get better when they catch COVID, or when versus why some people remain sick and get worse, IL-6 might be responsible for a lot of the lung tissue damage when the immune system gets overactivated as a result of the novel coronavirus, as a result of COVID-19. And a lot of the fibrosis and lung damage might have to do with excess IL-6. And right in this paper, we're seeing IL-6 associated with stress, with chronic stress. And so I really want to broaden the scope of this discussion a little bit too, and kind of make it more current. I really recommend that you all check out this epidemiologist, educator at Columbia University. His name is Robert Fulilove, and he is in fact full of love. He's a really brilliant mind. And he's written a couple of articles over here that I want to share with you. COVID-19 and police abuses have exposed the ugly truth about America. Racism kills, that there are more Black folks and people of color that are dying of COVID-19. And I link that in part to a number one of his articles over here on the planetary diet, the diet of the whole world. What are people eating? What are people in the Western world eating? And linking that to disease prevention, because there are food deserts in the United States that, 40% of Americans are dealing with obesity in some kind of way. The standard American diet is comprised of pesticides that are totally illegal in Europe. High fructose corn syrup is everywhere in the United States and is illegal in other countries. And that stuff, all that sugar, it slows down your lymph. It makes it like sludge, like molasses, when we're consuming that much sugar and other forms of dietary crap. What does our lymph do? That's where your white blood cells of your immune system are trying to crawl around. And we need to prevent it from being stuck with traffic. They need to have access to our body in order to kind of freely flow around and find invaders and catch them when they need to be. So absolutely, stress and diet and lifestyle and exercise and metabolism and race and where you live and where you don't live all contribute to the current crisis that we're experiencing. Access to care, And it's just kind of like on top of that, well, we just happen to have a highly infectious virus. I mean, these are all other more preventative issues that we could have tackled. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that any product that CV Sciences offers is a cure for anything. But where we feel like we can support you is, maybe when it comes to lifestyle choices, nutrition choices, but also mental health, right? As I was alluding to before, COVID-19 causes a lot of people, including my fiance, including myself, including some dear friends, to feel like our brain's not working some days, that we're dealing with mood issues, that we're dealing with, I deal with focus and motivation challenges sitting here in front of the computer all day. Like some days I'm on it, some days I'm like, man, this, quarantine's hard. And all that stuff related to our mental health, really, like I was pointing to, via the cortisol pathway, can weaken our immune system and potentially worsen the global pandemic. So it is my personal goal and the goal of CV Sciences, makers of Plus CBD, to expand your social circle, to offer products that ease the suffering of others. And I don't want to make it sound like we're opportunistic jerks that are starting to make products in just in response to this. No, we've been working on this for a long time. By the way, I don't know if you're familiar with these types of imagery over here. This is a park in San Francisco where they draw white circles on the ground, and then there's 6 feet separating one white circle to another so that, transmission does not occur as easily. And we want to support widening those circles. So I know I just said a lot, and I want to kind of bring it back to home. The problem is that stress shuts down your immune system so that you can run for your life. And we feel that where we can support your healthy stress response is with dietary supplements on top of meditation, exercise, and good lifestyle choices. We feel that Plus CBD can help your stress response. And this is actually kind of an Easter egg right here. This is what the new packaging is going to look like. But none of that right now. I want to talk about how CBD works in the body. And if you have listened to any of my other talks before, again, I wish I could have given a talk in person with you all, you will have had me talk about the endocannabinoid system. So let's jump into that. This is Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo. He's one of my science heroes. In 1998, he wrote that it is our endocannabinoid system that helps our body relax, eat, sleep, protect, and forget. And CBD from hemp, from cannabis, regulates the endocannabinoid system and can kind of modulate the way that the system works, maybe to help you relax better. That's the idea here. Now, why do we have a system in our body that is called endocannabinoid, or is named after the cannabis plant? I'm going to give you a little bit of history here. Back in, from the start of the colonial era in North America, people were growing hemp for textiles, for sails, for rope. It was part of American lifestyle. But it was the passage of the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 that started to demonize farmers for growing the hemp plant, despite the fact that, ultimately the hemp fiber was necessary for the World War II efforts a couple years later. The hemp plant became demonized because of its association with drug-like cannabis plants. And they really demonized the plant they named it marijuana in order to scare people by associating it with immigrants from Central America and South America. Reefer madness kind of started in the 30s and 40s. And ultimately in the 60s, 70s, Nixon signed the Controlled Substances Act, which really started the war on drugs and eliminated most scientists' ability to even study the plant. But despite those presidential actions and the fact that America forgot that they were built on the hemp plant, some of the senators still really wanted to understand what's going on with cannabis. I think one of the senators caught their son smoking it, and they're like, is he going to die? What's going to happen to him? So they couldn't research it in the United States. So they sent funding to a researcher in Israel by the name of Raphael Mechoulam. Raphael Mechoulam was not a pothead or anything. He was an organic chemist, and he just happened to get funding from the United States. So he said, sure, I'll study this stuff. And he elucidated the chemical structures of CBD and THC in 1963 and 1964. But they had no clue how CBD or THC worked at all in the body. And it wasn't until Dr. Alin Howlett in 1988 discovered the fact that we actually have cannabinoid receptors, although she didn't call them that at the time. But the fact that we had receptors that THC could bind to, that we produce those in our brain, and that they're really abundant in the brain. You have a lot of cannabinoid receptors in the brain, sparked Mechoulam to say, hey, wait a minute. We don't just make receptors for plant molecules. We have to have our own transmitters that bind to them. So he discovered anandamide in 1992. So a lot of his research and the research of others have helped us understand that this endocannabinoid system is mind-body medicine, is involved with eat, sleep, protect, and forget, is involved with your bliss response, is involved with your mood, with inflammation, with your immune function. You find cannabinoid receptors directly on immune cells. So endocannabinoid system is one of the ways in which our body knows how to balance the difference between stress and immune function, that it can allocate energy and food and cellular resources between stress and immune function because of the fact that you're finding cannabinoid receptors in your brain, in your immune cells, in the gut, in the lungs, in the liver, all over the place, right? And that CBD, it's not directly activating those receptors, but it can modulate that system. It can tonify and strengthen the endocannabinoid system to help you have a more appropriate stress response, inflammation response, appetite, metabolism, mood, sleep response, etc. Now, I mentioned that CV Sciences was one of the first companies that produced CBD in this country. And we're also one of the first companies to sponsor research demonstrating that our hemp extract does work for people. And so recently we got published a randomized placebo-controlled trial, and it demonstrated that plus CBD significantly improved sleep, stress response, overall wellness, and it also improved HDL cholesterol, oddly enough, in people that were taking it compared to placebo. That's what the evidence says. So this is important for us. I like and invite all of you to consider what are supplements you're taking every day. Because if our immune system and our brain is very responsive to diet and lifestyle, I personally take a probiotic, a fish oil supplement, and maybe a multivitamin, or definitely a vitamin D every single day. And I think that CBD can be categorized as a wellness supplement that you should be taking every single day for stress, sleep, metabolism, for all of the reasons that I've outlined. And again, because of the relationship between stress and immune function, there is some good rationale for us to be using CBD as a daily dietary ingredient. However, as a result of everything that's going on, it is my pleasure to offer you, or to introduce for you, new products that CV Sciences is bringing to market that are more specifically focused on immune function. Actually, before I get to that, Dr. Gary, are there any questions in the section, in the written section?
Nope. Evidently, you're hitting all the points and everyone's understanding. And again, if anyone has a question, feel free to type it in the question and answer block. It's all yours, Miles.
Thank you. And so, you know, I apologize if this sounds like a sales pitch, but I'm very excited to introduce for you these new products that are very targeted towards immune function. So of course, on the left-hand side, you know, again, imagine our seesaw, stress, immune function. On the left-hand side, we have plus CBD for stress management. And on the right-hand side, I'm introducing for you CV Acute, which is a new product intended to be taken the moment that you feel it, to nip it in the bud. And CV Defense is a product that's intended for daily immune function, to be used every single day to support your immunity throughout the season. And since we're changing and we're just going to start talking about immune function here, I just want to introduce the immune system, because this stuff is complicated. And I loved immunology when I was in grad school. I thought it was a really cool subject, but it is so fascinating how complex it is. So I love this quote, the immune system is where intuition goes to die, because of how complicated it is. And if you ever talk to Dr. Gary or Tamara or anybody else at Johnson's that knows a lot about physiology and biology, they know how many genes and pathways and receptors are tied up just in this system alone. So I just want to introduce for you kind of three concepts over here. The immune system can be roughly broken down into barrier immunity, innate immunity, and adaptive immunity. Barrier immunity is literally what it sounds like. It's your skin. It's the mucous membranes in your sinuses. It's the gut lining that prevents you from having leaky gut. All of that is basically separating what's inside of you from what's outside of you. Then, can you all hear me? Anyway, whatever. We have various cell types over here that include cells that gobble up invaders, phagocytes, dendritic cells, which sort of present what they get digested, and to other immune cells. There are all these signaling molecules, antibodies, complement, cytokines that signal between the cells, the receptors for those signaling cells, natural killer cells. And so in the innate immunity, it's kind of like the moment that you get a paper cut and bacteria or a virus crosses your barrier and enters your skin, all those white blood cells rush in to help and kind of try to contain the mess. You feel pain, you feel inflammation, because your body is dumping all these toxicants in order to kind of kill whatever crossed the barrier. And then you have this adaptive immunity, which is kind of like your more targeted special forces. And they include B cells, which produce antibodies, and antibodies neutralize stuff like viruses and parasites. And then T cells can kill our healthy cells that got infected by viruses. And our immune system works at different times, such that, the innate immune function is going to be most active on the scale of hours, whereas the adaptive immune response is what's ultimately going to be what really goes after the infection and leads you to feeling better. And that is what takes weeks or days and weeks. If you think it takes you about a week to get over a common cold, it's because your T cells need to first defeat the virus, and then they need to produce what are called a subset of T cells called T regulatory cells that say, okay, inflammation over, fever over, chills over, cough over, back to normal, right? And a lot of the cold symptoms that you get, or the flu symptoms that you get, aren't directly caused by the virus, but are actually, they're symptoms that are caused by the immune system. Our body gets a fever in order to kill the virus, and it's the T cells and interferons are one of the signaling molecules that interact with all these immune cells that cause you to have a fever in order to kill the virus, or to help our immune cells kill viruses and bacteria and whatnot. So really, what we think about these products over here, CV Defense and CV Acute, are to aid different parts of your immune system so that your overall health and wellness is going to be stronger and more vigilant and more productive. And that maybe you can resolve some of the lingering of those symptoms in a more timely manner. So I'm pleased to introduce CV Acute over here. And CV Acute is, it's actually based on a traditional botanical that's used in traditional Chinese medicine. And we're going to talk about the implications of that. That is SHL, and I'm going to try to pronounce this. I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation. SHL stands for Shuanghuanglian. And this ingredient, Shuanghuanglian, has existed since the 1960s, but in traditional Chinese medicine, they've used the herbs in this formula for 3,000 years. These are really powerful herbs. We're going to talk about what they do. This formula is so recognized in China that it was cited by the World Health Organization in a report that the World Health Organization wrote about the SARS coronavirus infection of 2004 in Hong Kong. So it's used in hospitals in China. It's been used in children for over 50 years. It's 100% plant-based. It's a really well-researched product too. And so this is really interesting. I want to talk a little bit more about traditional Chinese medicine, because of course traditional Chinese medicine has evolved and existed over the course of thousands and thousands of years. And in TCM, doctors use lifestyle, diet and exercise, meditation and acupuncture, along with botanicals and herbs for treatment. But so what is really special about traditional Chinese medicine is that it was modernized in the 1960s. And this is something that a lot of folks in the West forget about. They think that, oh, it's just acupuncture, it's just these herbs that have been used for thousands of years. But you have to realize in the history of China that in the 1800s, they were subjugated by the Western powers. And when Mao Zedong came to power, he really wanted to kind of reinvigorate the sense of Chinese national spirit and kind of focused on reviving the ancient practices and kind of scholars of thousands of years ago in reviving their works, reviving their understanding of medicine and herbs and acupuncture, and kind of bringing that and thrusting it forward into the modern era. And so they actually took all these ancient herbs and studied them with current modern science. And that's where we get all of these publications on actually using ingredients such as shuanghanglian in treating various respiratory infections, virus infections. So if any of you are skeptical of that idea, and that's fine, I just want to share with you something really practical. And it doesn't directly relate to what we're talking about, but I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Nobel laureate Tu Youyou. Feel free to type it into the chat if you've heard of her before. Tu Youyou won the Nobel Prize in 2015, but she does not have a PhD. She's not a doctor. She's a scientist. She's a citizen scientist from China that in the 60s and 70s basically was able to read these 3,000-year-old documents on traditional Chinese medicine. It is a very different script than what got modernized into modern, Mandarin and Cantonese. But she was able to read it. And she read the documents that basically said how to extract the sweet wormwood plant to treat malaria. And then in the laboratory, she used those extraction techniques from 3,000 years ago to come up with a compound called artemisinin. And artemisinin quickly became a prescription drug all over the world. It's an essential medicine as an anti-malarial drug. So she won the Nobel Prize, and the title of her Nobel Prize lecture is a gift from traditional Chinese medicine to the world, because she took what was this obscure plant and basically made it a mainstream medicine for everyone. And this happened right around the time that shuanghanglian, SHL, that is in the CV Acute formula, really kind of came into being and started to get researched too. So SHL in China has become the leading choice for preventing a certain type of common cold in China. Whenever they hear about a zoonotic jump from bat to humans, it sells out in the marketplace. And clinical research really demonstrates that it does support immune health and respiratory health. The World Health Organization, WHO, in their report says that benefits may be greater if treatment is started at an early stage. So what I always tell people is that the moment you feel fire in your throat and wind causing you chills, start to take this formula. Because the moment you take it, it might, and then you really hammer it for a couple of days, it might help your immune system respond more appropriately to whatever you are feeling. And the reason why that is that shuanghanglian contains the flower of honeysuckle, the root of Baikal skullcap, and the fruit of forsythia. And when you go into the studies, You go on PubMed, like I like to do, and look at all the peer-reviewed scientific articles. There's evidence to show that these ingredients together have a direct antiviral activity, have an immunomodulatory activity, and an anti-inflammatory activity. So that's really important. Direct antiviral activity. That means that you're able to block the virus from replicating within the cell. I have a slide in a couple of slides from now that shows how viruses work within cells and how you can use some of these herbal ingredients to disrupt that. Immunomodulatory activity means that you're priming the pump, that you're kind of giving your immune system an early warning signal so that your immune system can function better. In contrast, when you take Advil, when you take ibuprofen, you're shutting down inflammation, so that helps with reducing some of the symptoms, but it might actually be blocking some of your immune system's ability to cope. And then even though, I just said Advil shuts down inflammation, SHL can also have an anti-inflammatory activity, but it does so through modulating the immune system. So it doesn't completely shut down the immune response that you need. Rather, it might help your immune system not get to the point where you have to worry about cytokine storms and interleukin-induced tissue damage. And the reason for that is that the flower of honeysuckle, the root of Bicol skullcap, and the fruit of forsythia all have dozens of different molecules with different potential benefits. So it's kind of like when we talk about the hemp plant has CBD, but then the hemp plant has all this other like phytonutrient goodies in there. Well, these are all full spectrum extracts of these three herbs over here, and they contain different compounds that can help you deal with that viral response, immune response, inflammatory response, etc. But in particular, I want to focus on three different compounds just because they're really well studied. Honeysuckle actually has something called microRNA, which is a small non-coding component of RNA that disrupts your cellular RNA, messenger RNA production. We need DNA is what's coded into our genetics, and then DNA gets translated into proteins via messenger RNA, and microRNA disrupts that process. So you can kind of alter the way in which your genes kind of transcribed and translate for various proteins. So it's actually really cool that there are pretty good studies that show that honeysuckle contains a microRNA that survives extraction and gets into the body that can help you deal with certain viruses that include influenza. And they even just recently came out with a study that shows that microRNA can disrupt SARS coronavirus. Then Bicol skullcap, and by the way, I want to be clear, this is Bicol skullcap. It's a similar plant, but it's a different plant than the American skullcap that's in your sleep time tea. American skullcap, great for relaxation, whereas Bicol skullcap, or sometimes called Chinese skullcap, is actually really good for the liver. It's really good for the immune system. And it's an immunomodulator that can disrupt viral entry. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then the fruit of forsythia can inhibit cell damage. It's an antioxidant, protect our lung cells overall from various factors. This is a cell, and this is a virus. And what viruses do, well, they're not alive. Bacteria, fungi, parasites, they're alive. Viruses, not alive. Why? Because viruses can't replicate by themselves. Viruses hijack our host machinery in order to replicate. That's how they evolve and travel from host to host. They get into our cells. In the case of SARS coronavirus, it's through a receptor or an enzyme called ACE2. And ACE2, by the way, is really important for blood pressure and a number of other functions. So maybe that's why, unfortunately, COVID-19 seems to be worse in folks with metabolic syndrome and other types of comorbidities. The virus hijacks ACE2 to get into the cell, and then the virus hijacks all of the cellular machinery in order to kind of replicate, and then it has this mechanism by which it escapes the cell, where it can then travel to other cells and then ultimately travel from me to you, which is why you should wear a mask. With various ingredients like skullcap that contains bicalayan. Bicalayan actually is studied to block some of the receptor sites and inhibit the ability of the virus from entering the cell in the first place. And on top of that, there's some studies that show that bicalayan from skullcap, that's in the SHL CV Acute formula, can prevent the virus from budding and exiting the cell. So this is pretty powerful. This is really good to have as a tool. It's not just bicalayan. Elderberry can have some of these effects too. Quercetin can have some of these effects too. But what we're seeing with bicalayan is that it's really quite effective for this. And especially when you combine that with the microRNA that's in honeysuckle, that is going to shut down some of the synthesis of, where the virus is copying its messenger RNA within the nucleus. So you combine that with the forsythicides from the forsythia plant that protects the cell from dying overall, you're looking at a really good formula at a biological, biochemical level to protecting your cells. And not even speaking about what it's doing to kind of prime the pump with the immune system. Now, some of you might be wondering, okay, SHL, it's a Chinese medicine. And the sad thing is that sometimes with Chinese herbal products is that they might have some contaminants in there. Growing up, I would take the orange line with my dad down to Chinatown, and we would grab a bottle of yin chow at one of those like cool stores that really meant for Chinese folks. And then you hear these reports, that sometimes these products have higher levels of lead, unfortunately, or whatever. CV Acute, what we're using is so clean in terms of the purity. We're working with this company that are growing the herbs in China, but then it's registered and sort of produced in Canada. It's actually a registered natural health product. And we test it multiple times in its production. There's no Prop 65 levels, there's no detectable heavy metals. You're seeing all of the correct amounts of the components. So I'm really excited that we kind of get to honor this botanical ancient medicine and deliver it to our health food stores and our compounding pharmacies like Johnson's in a really respectful and sustainable way. When we look at the human studies, we do see some pretty good research out there that demonstrates that this ingredient can help people recover when they're dealing with, needing extra lung support, when we're needing, symptom relief. So I feel comfortable recommending this product just as something that you might want to take if you have to get into an airplane, or if you have to get into a public place, or if you just want to keep it just in case. I think this is an excellent product that we can use when we need it to nip it in the bud the moment you feel it in the back of your throat. Okay, so it's 7:47. There's another stretch here that I want to get through. Let's see how fast we can go through it. We might go a little bit over time. I apologize if we do, but I want to make sure we do have time for questions too. Because we just introduced CV Acute, and then the other product that I'm really excited for you to know about is called CV Defense. Again, none of these products cure or treatment for any disease whatsoever. These are new products that are intended to support your healthy immune function and your respiratory function. And there's the evidence to back it up. Excuse me. So CV Defense is meant to be taken every day. And the reason for that is that we're using a number of nutraceuticals, botanicals, vitamins, and minerals that help to feed your immune activity day in and day out. This is a doctor-formulated product that contains vitamin A, zinc, selenium. It contains an organic reishi mushroom extract. Reishi mushroom is a mushroom that's also used in traditional Chinese medicine, but you find it in Japanese medicine, and even in some cases in Western herbalism, because it does grow all around the world. And it's really great for supporting our natural killer cells, which is kind of right on the edge between innate immunity and adaptive immunity. But really the star of the show in CV defense over here is an ingredient called PEA, palmitoyl ethanolamide. And PEA is supported by hundreds of research papers and 39 human clinical studies. It's a really exciting ingredient. PEA actually can regulate the endocannabinoid system, kind of like how CBD regulates the endocannabinoid system. But whereas CBD is derived from cannabis, from hemp, PEA is made inside of you. All of us have PEA inside of us. But you can also find it in dietary sources. It exists in eggs, alfalfa, peanuts, and some other types, soy, etc., I think. It's a lipid mediator that can support a healthy inflammation response. I'm going to talk about some of the studies that show why it might be useful for seasonal defense. And when we pair that with zinc, selenium, reishi mushroom, vitamin A, and vitamin D, the combination of all of these ingredients supports the health of your barrier immunity, the first line of your defense, your innate immunity to sound the alarm whenever something crosses that barrier, and adaptive immunity, such as your antibodies and your T cells. So I'm going to share with you some history here. This is kind of fun for me. You know, even though I'm a science nerd, I really love history as well. And so in this presentation, I feel like I've gone less on the hardcore science and more on some of the history. And I want to share with you some of where PEA is coming from, some of the context by which I am excited about it. We're going back to 1939. I don't know if any of you are history nerds like I am, but in 1939, World War II just broke out in Europe. And the United States wouldn't get dragged into the war for a couple more years, but the United States was still dealing with the aftershock of the Great Depression. So I want to introduce you to some scientists. Coburn and Moore are bacteriologists that were publishing articles on their findings that feeding dried egg yolk powder to poor and hungry children in these cramped New York City apartments prevented the symptoms associated with rheumatic fever. That they would still catch the infection, but that feeding them egg yolk was sufficient to reducing the symptoms associated with that infection. And they didn't know at the time what was in the egg yolk. They just knew that these poor kids couldn't afford eggs. They couldn't afford to eat eggs. But that once you start feeding them egg yolk, they start to get better. All right, so hold that thought. Now, still 1939, but across the Atlantic Ocean, I want to introduce for you Dr. Rita Levi-Montalcini. Type in the chat section if you know who she is. She's a superstar. She would ultimately win the Nobel Prize, but as of 1939, she recently lost her position at the University of Turin in Italy due to Benito Mussolini's laws barring Jews from academic positions, because Mussolini at the time was trying to cozy up to Hitler. So at the height of World War II, Mussolini's regime actually started to collapse and the Nazis invaded from the north. Dr. Rita Levi-Montalcini fled with her family from Turin to Firenze. And she set up a laboratory in hiding. And what she was working on, researching, she was fearless. She continued to research how the nervous system develops. And during World War II, she provided her medical expertise to the Italian partisans, the resistance. And while she was doing that, she was also researching what would ultimately lead her to win the Nobel Prize. She discovered what's called nerve growth factor, and it has to do with how our nerve cells create connections. She survived World War II, she survived the Holocaust, and her critical work during this time helped her win the Nobel Prize. At this point, you might be thinking, well, that's a really cool story, but what does that have to do with PEA? Well, it turns out that PEA was in the dried egg yolks. So when Coburn and Moore were feeding those sick kids, poor kids in New York City, PEA, and they were getting better, or where they're feeding them dried egg yolk and they were getting better, it might have to do with the PEA. Because very small amounts of PEA have to do with producing an anti-allergic effect and an anti-inflammatory effect. And where Dr. Rita Levi-Montalcini comes in is that she discovered how PEA works in the body. And she discovered this in 1993, around the time that Raphael Mechoulam in Israel discovered that we produce endocannabinoids. Levi-Montalcini discovered that PEA, which looks a lot like anandamide. PEA works as an endocannabinoid and can help our immune cells reduce inflammation. In fact, some people describe PEA as an endo-antihistamine that helps our mast cells not get so activated. So since her research in the 90s on PEA, we've had all the studies come out that PEA is really good in pain, might be useful in fibromyalgia, so on and so forth. And I know I'm jumping around in the chronology here, but I want to rewind for a second and go to the 1970s. Because the reason why you probably have not heard about PEA, despite the fact that it does so much in the body, is that it kind of got locked behind the Iron Curtain for a little bit of time. And I want to share with you some studies that were done in Czechoslovakia in 1974. And these were the types of studies that you really could only have in the Warsaw Pact states. Basically, factory workers were given either a placebo or PEA. There was a drug that was made based on PEA called Impulsin. And this is in Škoda Motorworks over here. Škodovi Zadovi is basically like this gigantic factory in the heart of Central Europe where they produce artillery and tanks and cars and all these industrial material. You can see, I mean, imagine if you had a flu outbreak in this factory, right? Like that would be pretty bad. So they gave workers either placebo or this PEA ingredient every day all throughout the flu season. And they said, and they didn't know, the workers didn't know which one they were being given. It was like 3,000 different people were given either one or the other, placebo or PEA. And actually, there were up to 6 different studies where they found that PEA has positive treatment effects in respiratory infections and can be used in influenza prophylaxis. And it's safe. That there was a significant protection among workers that were given PEA. In one study, up to 60% protection from influenza, calling out sick from work, having respiratory symptoms, having a sore throat, when they were taking PEA every single day. One of the main researchers in Czechoslovakia, Kachlik, stated that no side effects were registered after several years of testing with PEA in these worker communities. So, yeah, this stuff is pretty well researched. And even though I'm not saying that CB defense is a cure for anything, the research on PEA and on these other ingredients, like just even the basic stuff that we kind of overlook sometimes, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, I really feel that the combination of those is going to be helpful for you keeping your wellness balanced as part of the CV defense formula, helping your immune cells stay healthy throughout the whole season long, just like these studies and these workers received a potential benefit that was clinically significant in the 1970s. Now we only have 3 minutes left to go. I might skip through these slides. Maybe I'll just touch on them briefly, and I can always send you the information if you want to take a closer look at them, or if we have more time, we can go back and look at them later. Basically, the gist here is that there's concern about antibodies with COVID. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's in a couple of popular articles. BBC is talking about this, that, if antibody levels for people that have gotten COVID and recovered diminish after a couple of weeks, does that mean that people are going to be protected from catching it again? And so that kind of freaked out scientists for a little bit until latest research shows that there's a different part of our immune cells, the T cells, that might really be involved with long-term protection against various viruses, especially SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. and that T cells might be really what has this long-term protective effect. So the next two slides here, I have to skip through this for time's sake, are basically a summary that demonstrates that there is some very preliminary preclinical research that the botanicals in CV Acute, in the SHL formula, and in the CV Defense product interact with T cells in some way. Now, whether that relates to any specific disease or any specific virus, we do not know. I have to be clear about this, not just for legal purposes, but for ethical purposes. I'm not trying to sell you on hope. But I'm a scientist by trade. I spent time in a laboratory, and I spent time working in a health food store. I used to work at Cambridge Naturals in Porter Square. And I love stores like Johnson's Compounding Pharmacy, where they guide you towards supplements that might help you. And based on my scientific understanding, I believe that plus CBD, CV Defense, and CV Acute do hold some promise for keeping us healthy in the upcoming months. And that taking care of oneself is an act of resistance during times of global challenge. And so hang in there. We're all in this together. All right? Let's focus on personal responsibility when it comes to health. Good nutrition. Try to get your bike rides in now that the weather's good. You know, fresh air, all that good stuff. And think about what supplements you are taking. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you felt that this information was useful for you. Take care.
Thank you so much, Miles. And that was a lot of information in a short period of time.
Sure
If
was.
anyone has any, one question that came up, am I correct, but there is no CBD hemp in CV Acute or CV Defense? I hear that there is research to see that CBD oil without THC can calm severe itching from severe eczema. What do you
So,
think about this?
yes, so CV Acute and CV Defense, I'm glad you were paying attention. You're right. They are without CBD. They're without our CBD products. Now, of course, you're welcome to combine them. Both CV Acute and CV Defense are based on ingredients with a strong safety profile, and they can often be combined with other supplements and with your pharmacist's permission, other medications. But there are some folks that, for whatever reason, do not feel comfortable taking hemp-derived CBD, whether it has to do with their employment or some other concern. We wanted to make a product that could speak to those people too. Now, I certainly agree with you that CBD does have some potential in limiting various inflammatory issues, and that may include eczema. Although I'll tell you, my personal battle with eczema, I needed to get rid of gluten in order for my eczema to disappear. I need to fix my gut. I always recommend people take a good probiotic. At Johnson's, they carry one of my favorite probiotics, which is made by Microbiome Labs. It's soil bacteria. You can ask them about that. Fish oil, healthy fats, and maybe adding some CBD on top of that might be a good way of controlling inflammation within the body that may manifest as eczema. But that being said, even though CV Defense does not contain CBD, it does contain PEA. And even though PEA is something that's inside us, it behaves in a similar but similar enough way to CBD that some people receive similar benefits from it.
Okay. It's a good question and good answer. And I want to thank you for stressing there isn't a magic bullet for the immune system to prevent colds or flu or anything else. But a lot of the backbone of staying healthy is our diet, our lifestyle, our relationships, washing our hands, being smart, not going into crowded places with a whole lot of people and poor air circulation. And before we started tonight, we were talking about how we're doing a lot of things now that we should have been doing for decades or centuries. Washing our hands when you don't feel well, staying home, staying away from people. And that would really limit the spread of everything from the common cold to some of these big diseases we're having. And I think the key is going to be to try to stay calm, not to be overly stressed, as you pointed out, the HPA axis in our adrenals, get a good night's sleep, reevaluate our lives. That, I think a lot of us are doing that, what's important and what isn't important. And then it doesn't hurt and it can only help to support your immune system. And CV Sciences has given us a couple of new options. There's a lot of good things out there, and it's probably a combination of some of different ones for different people. There isn't one right. It would be wonderful if there was one product that worked
Right.
for everyone. But I want to thank you very much. As always, you've given us so much food for thought, and that is great. A question about email, what email to use if someone has a question. You can email it right to me, Gary at naturalcompounder.com. And if it's something I can't answer, I will get in touch with Miles and I'll get you the answer back. I want to thank you, your company, for all your support. I want to thank all of you for attending tonight, and I will be notifying the winner of the drawing of a gift in the next couple of days. And this recording will be on the site within the next couple of days on our website. And remember, we do have, these are brand new products that were just released. And I believe most of them are in and the rest are coming, but
Yep.
they are 20% off all week, right through the weekend. And if you order on Saturday, save an additional 6.25%, because remember everyone, this weekend is tax-free weekend.
So actually, I just want to say CV Defense, not yet in stock. CV Acute, I believe you just notified us, is in stock. Thank you for bringing them in. You're one of the first stores in the country to introduce them, and we appreciate our partnership. And this is a lot of fun for me. So thank you again for this opportunity to share
Oh,
this
you're
information with
quite
you.
welcome, and we'll have to do it again. And thank you for your hard work and your company's work of not just putting out a product because it looks right, but doing the real deep research before you even think of putting the product out. And that's one of the reasons your line was the line we brought in, because there was science and good people, ethical people behind it. So thank you, and everyone have a good night and a good day tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Take care. Be well.